Welcome back to When Stars Fill Half the Sky. This is Chapter 12, When the Earth Quakes. They escorted Michael back into a room where the president and her chief of staff were waiting, along with Mike Mistretta handcuffed to a chair in a corner. Armed agents were hovering over him. His head was down and did not raise it, but Michael knew he was aware of him.
Michael, I hope you were able to rest a little.
Yes, thank you, Madam President.
Good. We need to talk. Your friend here is not pleased with our White House hospitality. He seems quite determined to leave as soon as possible.
Mistretta lifted his head slowly. She continued to explain to Michael how there had been multiple attempts over the last few hours by Monde and his surrogates to breach White House security. Miss President, Michael interrupted nervously. Mistretta's implants, they have a direct link to Monde. He's probably listening to us right now.
Oh, I'm counting on it.
She quipped, raising an eyebrow with suppressed delight.
You two guys seem very important to him, and I want to know why.
Madam President, Mistretta interrupted, through eyes shrouded by a misty gaze. He spoke now with a disconcerting Eastern European accent. Even his facial muscles moved differently than before. I, Astan Monde, will only make this one offer to you. In exchange for the safe passage of these two individuals into my custody, I will...
Wait a minute. You want to bargain? You want to bargain? What makes you think you have any leverage to negotiate? These are American citizens, and you have no right to negotiate anything. On top of that, there's nowhere for you to run, and you know it. It's time for you to leave your floating fortress, come back down here and face the music. I promise you fair proceedings and all the due process entitled to you under U.S. and international law.
I have no intention of surrendering. Not even to you. This world is full of fools like you who know nothing of who I am and what is mine.
I hope you're recording this, asshole,
the president whispered to her aide, even though she knew such a rant through surrogate lips could never implicate Monde in a court of law. Monde continued, You are truly a disappointment to me, Dorothy. I had great plans for you. You could have been a true agent of change. I know that is what you wanted, to keep your country from any further pain or suffering. But look what you have done, all because you wouldn't listen to me. What we could have accomplished together would have been unparalleled in history. Together, we could have ushered that new era of human existence you so deeply crave.
Oh, dear sir, history is full of megalomaniacs who thought they could change the world. We don't need the help of cowards like you who lurk in the shadows, pulling purse strings and whispering pie-in-the-sky promises.
History. History is written by feeble-minded individuals of no consequence who fail to recognize the true struggle for this planet. Instead, they cherry-pick events and then compose stories through rose-colored glasses, or they project their own misgivings on individuals they choose to misrepresent. You, Madam President, a perfect case in point. You honestly believe it was your community service and rigorous campaigning that put you into office. Think again, Dorothy. Only a few years ago, money started pouring into your election coffers. I remember you not being so concerned where that surge of cash was coming from. You were beleaguered and tired, ready to give up. But that second wind lifted your sails, didn't it? Then miraculously, all your rivals started to recede from your political landscape. Everything was turning around, remember? You thought all that was what? Good fortune? An act of God? Think again. The president turned quiet, reflecting on Mond's words and her path to the White House. There were skeletons in her closet, and she knew it. But, as many presidents before her, she didn't allow herself to be weighed down by these unspoken activities. She convinced herself that the end would simply have to justify the means. Remember this. I can just as easily destroy you, Dorothy. The president suddenly took a deep breath in a moment of clarity. Monde overplayed his hands with that last statement. No one ever threatens Dorothy Addison Mason. Not the playground bully when she was 7, not her physically abusive ex-husband, and certainly not G. Aston Monde. The conference chair in front of her suffered the brunt of her indignation as her nails dug 3 small holes in the upholstered leather headrest.
I don't care who you are or what you've done. I am the President of these United States. And I stand for the office it represents. We are a free people united, rejecting monsters like you who threaten our way of life. Your reprehensible actions and deeds of destruction speak for themselves. You are no friend or ally of this country or the world. We will not bow to your threats. Mark my words, Monde. I will do everything in my power to bring you down.
Monde had finally heard enough. From thousands of miles away in his orbiting space station, he nodded to Stephen Lowry, hovering next to him. From his remote position, Monde gave the order to completely shut down the Prophet 10,000. The domino effect would be catastrophic, throwing most financial markets and related institutions into mayhem and disorder. This would result in more massive riots and looting, destruction and death. You have just signed your own articles of impeachment, Madam President. The world will ultimately blame you for its forthcoming tribulations. I will have my way, no matter what. 4 years later. The only thing President Mason ever really gave into was the gray, now spreading across her thick head of hair. Likewise, the deepening wrinkles on her face bore the weight of a nation still reeling in the wake of the Prophet 10,000 shutdown. Although still president, her second term was a rocky and tempestuous ride, with many still skeptical about her. What they did appreciate was how well she unmasked Monde's global attempt to dominate the world through mind control. For sure, he was to blame for the global economic collapse. But reports started coming in that Monde didn't stick around to take the blame. Apparently, he passed away from natural causes a year after the Prophet shutdown. His body was flown back down to the surface of the planet. Reputable third-party experts verified its DNA as belonging to G. Aston Monde. But only Stephen Lowry aboard his space station knew what really happened. After Mike Mistretta mysteriously disappeared from a federal prison facility in New Mexico, Monde was successful in transferring the collective into their new host body. Mike Mistretta had become their new avatar. So as far as the world was concerned, Monde died up in orbit. End of story. But Michael Fiveland, who had been moved to a secure location in the Utah desert, knew the truth and shared it freely with President Mason. The heavily protected U.S. military base known as Area 70 was an ordinary-looking 2-story building. Its purpose, as far as the public knew, was to maintain and monitor the government's complicated satellite network. But beneath the humble appearance of its simple steel frame, its adjoining airstrip and dusty old hangar was a vast underground facility secretly being developed for the last 15 years. To this point, the collective knew where Michael was, but could not breach the heavily guarded underground citadel lined with lead. Even inside, only a handful of individuals knew who he was and the important role he played in maintaining national security. During his stay, he remained in close and constant contact with the president. The Morricell continued to draw him into the half-realm on a fairly regular basis, and he became very enlightened on many subjects of Earth's history and of key individuals who made it. He became a conduit of sorts, a medium or guide to President Mason, and was the main reason why Monde failed in destroying her presidency. Michael would visit whomever she'd ask him to and learn things, intimate things, private things. She still didn't quite understand how he could do it, but she'd learned to trust him and rely on his intel. Of course, he was unofficially appointed to our cabinet, a senior policy advisor, which offered him certain privileges and security clearances, while at the same time offered the president plausible deniability of their relationship. He also learned how to stave off the accelerated aging process as well. The trick was to know when to leave the half-realm. It was like developing a new instinct or some sort of internal method of self-preservation. Michael was treated well and lacked no creature comfort. He wanted for nothing, but amidst this privilege, he started to grow restless. After all, a prison is still a prison, no matter how nicely it's decorated. He longed for fresh air and the light of day, to see real stars at night, and just to walk freely without 6 heavily armed guards encircling him. But as long as he was 300 meters below the ground in that luxurious Faraday cage, it remained virtually impossible for anyone to detect that unique energy signature of the Morricell in his hand. Back in the nation's capital, Mason could do no wrong. In the world's eyes, she was being heralded as one of the greatest political minds of history. Her timely policies and thoughtful executive orders steadily steered the nation and the world back from the edge of sure disaster. Only secretly would she offer gratitude to Mr. Fiveland. He understood why she had no choice but to take full credit for her political success. But for Michael, it started to become rather demoralizing, watching the news broadcasts almost every night with yet another story of the gallant and brave antics of our great President Dorothy Mason. Of course, she was aware of his plight, but had no time to address it. Once again, it appeared that the end would simply have to justify the means. There were hundreds of military and scientific personnel working in that underground facility. Some of them recognized his face and knew who he was, but never questioned. Likewise, he was not to question their business, although he instinctively knew everything about them, thanks to the Morricell. There was one person in particular that Michael wanted to meet. His name was Leonard Nelson, an Army general assigned to a separate wing of that facility. Nelson once lived in the same Spring Valley neighborhood as the Fivelands. Michael was interested in him because he was Julie Nelson's father, the girl he kissed in Warren's backyard party moments before the earthquake. "Come to the cafeteria at 1600 hours," read the scribbled note quickly handed to Michael by one of his guards who knew the general. Finally, there was someone Michael could connect with on a personal level, someone who knew him, who knew his past, and made him feel like something more than a lab rat. The cafeteria was on the list of approved destinations for Michael, and General Nelson knew it. What followed for the next few weeks was a carefully controlled method of sharing notes and messages back and forth. Eventually, he told him about Julie graduating from UCLA and that she was offered an entry-level position with the New World Finance and Currency Exchange in Geneva, Switzerland after she graduated. Michael was troubled and told Leonard that he should be concerned as well because that organization was run by the New World Alliance and was directly under the collective's control. Unfortunately, Leonard believed, as many did, that Monde was dead, but he was still concerned for his daughter. So it took some time for Michael to convince Leonard without disclosing exactly how he knew. But the real question on the general's mind was how to convince his daughter not to go to Geneva. She would not take very well to this news, as she was very excited about going to work for the currency exchange. It took a while, but they finally came up with what appeared to be a feasible plan. Memorial Day was approaching, and the facility was hosting a family outdoor luncheon to be held not far from the entrance to the underground facility. Michael's guard detail would be a bit more relaxed during that weekend, as everyone looked forward to having family and loved ones coming to visit. Leonard devised a plan to get his daughter inside to meet Michael face to face, a move that would probably get him court-martialed if their plan failed. But that didn't matter to him. His daughter's safety was all he could think about. Families were gathered. Music was playing, and the Memorial Day festivities had everyone in a good mood. Inside, guests were meandering about the lobby area, viewing pictures and items set up to casually inform them of the important government work and contribution to the nation's security. General Nelson was one of the principals in charge of setting up the presentation, so it really wasn't too difficult for him to slip Julie past the dog and pony show. Michael was waiting at the end of the underground corridor when the elevator door opened, and out stepped the general with his daughter. Michael's heart skipped a beat. She was more beautiful than ever. Like a light illuminating a darkened room, Julie always had a way of changing the atmosphere. He turned to walk toward her and felt those old high school jitters and insecurities starting to percolate. He turned his head as if he was looking at something interesting on the wall. Some juvenile habits are just hard to break. Unwittingly, she walked towards him with all the confidence and swagger he remembered from their high school days. Then suddenly, she recognized who he was, and confusion muted her confidence, for something was clearly wrong. It had only been 4 years, and yet he looked so much older, like someone in his 40s. "Julie, hi," he said. She said nothing, but continued to stare. The general was clearly nervous, as their window of opportunity was already closing. "Julie," her father said, "Michael here has something very important to tell you." "General, may I speak to Julie alone for a moment?"
3 minutes, Fiveland.
He spurted, nervously peering at his watch. Michael walked Julie to a nearby hallway bench. They sat down. "Last time I saw you was at Warren's party. Seems like so long ago." "Sure does. I still remember that song. Take on me, take me on. I'll be gone in a day or two." They chimed together, sounding as terribly off-key and inebriated as they were that night they sang it together in Warren's backyard. They both started laughing and turned together to look at the general, who was standing 30 meters away. He just shook his head and smirked. They laughed again. "It's so good to see you." It's good to see you too," she retorted, but with some reservation. He could sense her confusion about his appearance. "I know. I look different, right?" "Well, yeah, but it looks good on you. But how?" "A lot has happened, Julie, since I last saw you," he started as he turned his head to look at the floor. He hesitated for a moment. She waited patiently for him to continue. "1 minute we were talking just like this. Everything was great. Then suddenly everything changed. The ground started shaking and we were all running in different directions. It was crazy. I asked everybody about you. I saw you on the news, how you and your mom disappeared. No one knew what happened to you guys. Then there's been all kinds of theories ever since. I even heard someone say that you were abducted by aliens." They laughed again. It felt good. He hadn't laughed like that with anyone in years. And in one way, it felt as if they were back again in Warren's yard, continuing their conversation. "I thought you would eventually call me, but like everyone else, I just figured you had vanished too. And now you're here. Wow. You've been here all this time?" Pretty much. It's all kind of top secret, so I'm not sure how much I can tell you, but I thought about you a lot. There was no way to contact you. What happened to you? She asked, with wide-eyed innocence as she examined the lines in his face and his maturing hairline. I've been traveling a lot, he answered warily, stealing a peek at the palm of his hand. It wasn't glowing, so he continued. There's been a lot going on, and I've been kind of caught in the middle of it all ever since my mother passed. Then I became aware of some things, important things that make me very valuable to some very bad people. You mean Monde? But he's gone. Not really. What do you mean? From the corner of his eye, Michael could see General Nelson nervously tapping his watch. Look, let me just tell you why you're here. I happen to know that Monde's influence runs very deep. I explained this to your father when he told me you were going to go to Switzerland. Julie, I'm telling you right now, working for them would be a big mistake. Julie sat back and peered down the corridor at her father, who at that very moment was once again checking his watch. So that's what this is all about. He got you to do his dirty work, right? Julie, it's not like that at all. I'm the one who told him you shouldn't go. Her mind was racing. Emotions started swirling around a young woman who just wanted to make her own decisions and a dad who was rarely available in supporting her. This was too much to process. She started to get up out of her seat when Michael reached out and touched her arm. At that moment, the Maricel in his hand fired up, and that's when it happened. A tiny fragment of Maricel was released from his hand, plunging into her arm. She felt a pinprick. Julie repelled instantly, inspecting the area of her arm where he had just touched her, but found nothing. Instantly, the Maricel coursed through her bloodstream until seconds later it stopped, lodging itself in her spinal column near the base of her neck. She became nauseous and dizzy, typical symptoms for someone entering the portal for the first time. She sat back down. The walls of the corridor seemed to be falling away as strange lights and images started to appear. But she resisted strongly and continued to fight off the transition. After a few seconds, the feeling passed, and she was back to normal. Finally, she jumped to her feet and looked him square in the face, yelling,
What the hell was that? What did you do?
He stared back at her for a long second, not knowing exactly how to answer her, although he knew at that moment her life would never be the same. Julie,
What are you? Who are you? Dad!
She yelled, turning away, running for the elevator.
Get me out of here!
In the next chapter, Michael, depressed over losing Julie once again, goes back into the half-realm to try and make sense of his life. And there he meets the One.